Rain poured across the cemetery in cold silver sheets, soaking the black umbrellas gathered around Grandpa Walter's grave. The wind carried the scent of wet earth and dying flowers, while relatives whispered fake condolences to one another. At 17 years old, Ethan Walker stood silently beside the coffin, gripping the sleeves of his borrowed black suit so tightly his fingers hurt. He barely heard the pastor speaking. All Ethan could think about was the last conversation he'd had with Grandpa 3 days earlier in the hospital. "Don't let bitterness make your choices for you, kid," Grandpa had whispered weakly. "People reveal who they truly are when pride and money get involved." At the time, Ethan didn't fully understand those words. He was about to. His older brother Daniel stood beside their parents, looking polished and confident as always. Even at a funeral, Daniel somehow managed to look important. Ethan had spent his entire life living in his shadow. Daniel earned perfect grades, played sports, and worked at their father's company during summers. Ethan liked repairing old radios and sketching buildings in notebooks. To his parents, that made him strange, especially to his father. "Stand up straight." His father muttered sharply during the service. "At least pretend you care." The comment cut deep because Grandpa Walter had been the only person Ethan truly loved in the family. While everyone else criticized him, Grandpa listened. When Ethan talked about architecture, Grandpa actually paid attention. When Ethan failed classes after struggling with anxiety, Grandpa didn't call him lazy. "You've got a different kind of strength," he always said. After the burial ended, relatives slowly gathered beneath a white tent for food and conversation. Ethan wanted nothing more than to leave, but his mother stopped him near the entrance. "Your father wants to speak with you," she said quietly. Her nervous expression made Ethan uneasy. He followed her across the muddy grass toward a group of relatives standing near the parking lot. His father stood in the center holding a small velvet box in his hand, Grandpa's watch box. Ethan froze. "That watch belongs to this family," his father announced loudly enough for nearby relatives to hear. "Daniel should have it." Ethan's chest tightened. "Grandpa promised it to me." Daniel crossed his arms. "You seriously want to argue about inheritance at a funeral?" "You know he promised it to me," Ethan replied. His father stepped closer, eyes burning with anger. "Your grandfather wasn't thinking clearly near the end." That sentence snapped something inside Ethan. He was thinking clearly enough to know who actually visited him. Ethan shot back before he could stop himself. The crowd fell silent. Daniel's face darkened instantly while their mother whispered, "Ethan, stop." But years of frustration poured out all at once. "None of you cared about him until today," Ethan continued. Daniel only came around when Grandpa talked about changing the will. His father grabbed Ethan by the collar. "You ungrateful little brat." People stared openly now. Some relatives pretended not to listen while leaning closer anyway. Ethan's heart pounded painfully. Grandpa loved me because he actually knew me. The slap came so fast Ethan barely saw it. Gasps spread through the crowd. Rain dripped from Ethan's hair as he slowly touched his burning cheek. His mother looked horrified but said nothing. Then his father pointed toward the cemetery gates. "If you walk away with that watch," he said coldly, "don't ever come back." Ethan stared at him in disbelief. "You're serious?" "I'm done being embarrassed by you," his father replied. "You are no longer my son." The words hit harder than the slap. For a moment, Ethan honestly thought his mother would defend him. Instead, she lowered her eyes and whispered, "Maybe it's best if you leave for now." That silence broke his heart more than anything else. Ethan looked around one final time. No one stepped forward. No one defended him, not even family. With trembling hands, he picked up his duffel bag from beside a folding chair and walked away through the rain alone. Hours later, Ethan sat inside a nearly empty bus station on the edge of town. His clothes were damp, his cheeks still ached, and he had exactly $53 in his wallet. The old silver watch rested heavily in his palm. For the first time in his life, Ethan truly understood what abandonment felt like. As midnight approached, he unfolded the letter Grandpa had secretly slipped into his jacket at the hospital. Inside were only 7 words. "Build the life they said you couldn't. 7 years after the funeral, Ethan Walker no longer looked like the scared teenager sitting alone in a bus station with $50 and nowhere to go. At 24, he stood inside the glass office of Walker Ridge Construction, staring down at a busy construction site from the 12th floor. Workers in bright orange vests moved across steel beams, while cranes swung overhead against the morning sky. The company logo printed across the hard hats still felt unreal sometimes, because 7 years earlier, Ethan had been cleaning restaurant bathrooms just to survive. Now people called him Sir. His assistant knocked lightly before entering. The investor meeting starts in 20 minutes. Ethan nodded. I'll be there. After she left, he loosened his tie and glanced toward the old silver watch resting beside his laptop. Grandpa Walter's watch. Ethan carried it every single day, not because it was expensive, but because it reminded him where he started. The road to success had been brutal. After being thrown out, Ethan slept in shelters for months while working overnight shifts at a diner. During the day, he studied construction books in public libraries because college had become impossible without family support. Eventually, a warehouse manager noticed how quickly Ethan learned repairs and offered him better work. From there, Ethan climbed slowly and painfully upward. No shortcuts, no family connections, no help. Just exhaustion and stubborn determination. Sometimes, late at night, Ethan still remembered the humiliation of standing in the rain while his father disowned him in front of everyone. That memory never completely disappeared. It became fuel. His phone buzzed on the desk, interrupting his thoughts. Unknown number. Normally he ignored those calls, but something made him answer. Hello. A familiar voice spoke carefully. Ethan! His body froze instantly. It was his mother, 7 years. Not a single phone call, not one birthday message. Nothing. Now suddenly she remembered his number. What do you want? Ethan asked quietly. A long silence followed. We should talk. She finally said, Your father and Daniel want to see you. Ethan almost laughed. The same people who abandoned him now wanted a family reunion. I'm busy. Please, she whispered. Just dinner. One night. Against his better judgment, Ethan agreed. 2 days later, he entered an expensive downtown restaurant wearing a charcoal suit that probably cost more than his father earned in a month now. The hostess guided him toward a private table near the windows. His parents were already seated. The shock on their faces was obvious. Ethan understood why. The last time they saw him, he was a skinny teenager with second-hand clothes and nervous eyes. Now he carried himself differently. Confidence replaced fear. Years of struggle had hardened him. His father stood awkwardly. You look successful. Ethan sat down calmly. You didn't invite me here to discuss my appearance. An uncomfortable silence settled across the table. His mother forced a smile. How have you been? Good. You own a company now, she asked. Yes. What exactly does it? Why am I here? Ethan interrupted. The warmth instantly disappeared from the conversation. Then Daniel arrived. He looked terrible. Dark circles hung beneath his eyes, and his expensive suit looked rushed and wrinkled. Ethan immediately sensed something was wrong. Daniel sat down heavily without greeting him. Their father cleared his throat nervously. Your brother's been having some financial difficulties. Ethan leaned back silently. Daniel scoffed. It's temporary. How temporary? Ethan asked. Nobody answered. That told him everything. His mother clasped her trembling hands together. Daniel's business failed. There were investment problems. Gambling. Ethan said immediately. Daniel glared at him. You don't know what you're talking about. But Ethan did know. He had seen the signs before. Grandpa once warned him that Daniel always chased easy success instead of earning things honestly. Their father finally leaned forward. We need help. There it was, the real reason for the reunion. Ethan felt strangely calm instead of angry. How much? His mother looked ashamed to answer. $300,000. She whispered. Even after years apart, hearing the number spoken aloud stunned him. 300,000. The family who threw him away now sat asking him for rescue money. His father quickly added, It's a loan. Family helps family. Ethan stared at him for several seconds. Family, the word tasted bitter. Finally, Ethan asked the question that had lived inside him for 7 years. Was I family when you left me homeless? Nobody spoke. Daniel looked away first. His mother's eyes filled with tears while his father shifted uncomfortably in his chair. We made mistakes, his mother whispered. Mistakes? Ethan repeated softly. Dad called me an embarrassment at Grandpa's funeral. You watched me leave with nowhere to sleep. We were grieving? His father muttered weakly. Ethan almost laughed at the excuse. I was grieving too. Silence crushed the table again. For the first time, Ethan realized something important. They didn't miss him. They missed what he became. Slowly, he stood up from the table and placed cash beside his untouched drink. I hope things work out for you, he said calmly. Then he walked away while his mother quietly cried behind him. But even as he entered the elevator alone, one painful thought followed him. Why did their rejection still hurt after all these years? After the restaurant meeting, Ethan tried convincing himself he no longer cared about his family. He buried himself in work, attended meetings, visited construction sites, and spent longer hours at the office than usual. But no matter how busy he stayed, memories kept returning, his mother's tears, his father's uncomfortable silence, Daniel refusing to meet his eyes. For 7 years, Ethan imagined this exact moment. He imagined becoming successful while the people who abandoned him regretted everything. He thought victory would feel satisfying. Instead, it felt empty. 3 days later, Ethan's phone exploded with messages from relatives he hadn't heard from in years. Your parents are struggling. You only care about money now. Family should forgive each other. Some relatives even claimed Ethan owed his success to the values his parents taught him. Reading those messages made his stomach twist with anger. The same people who stayed silent at Grandpa Walter's funeral were suddenly experts on forgiveness. One message hurt more than the others. It came from Aunt Linda. Your grandfather would be ashamed of you. Ethan stared at the screen for a long time before tossing the phone across his couch. That night, he couldn't sleep. Instead, he sat in his dark apartment, turning Grandpa's silver watch slowly in his hands. Eventually, he remembered something Grandpa once said after Daniel crashed a borrowed car at 16. Some people spend their whole lives escaping consequences. Grandpa had muttered quietly. The memory stayed with Ethan. The next morning, he called an investigator who occasionally worked with his company's legal department. I need information about Daniel Walker's business collapse, Ethan said. Within a week, the full story arrived. It was worse than Ethan expected. Daniel hadn't simply failed in business. He had lied to investors, manipulated company accounts, and secretly borrowed enormous amounts of money to cover gambling debts. But the most painful discovery involved Grandpa Walter. During Grandpa's final illness, Daniel repeatedly pressured him for inheritance money. Bank records showed thousands of dollars transferred into Daniel's accounts, while Grandpa was heavily medicated. Worse still, Ethan discovered his parents knew about it. They had protected Daniel, again. Ethan sat silently in his office reading the documents while anger burned through his chest. For years he wondered whether maybe he had exaggerated the past in his mind. Maybe grief had distorted things. But the evidence proved otherwise. His family always chose Daniel even when he was wrong, especially when Ethan suffered for it. Most people would have exposed everything publicly. Ethan could have destroyed Daniel's reputation overnight. The evidence was enough. Instead, another idea formed, quiet, precise, personal. 2 months later, the bank holding the mortgage on his parents' home sold several debts to Ethan's investment group during a restructuring deal. His parents never realized Ethan was behind the purchase until the legal notices arrived. His mother called him 14 times in one evening. He ignored every call. Finally, his father left a voicemail. Please, we need to talk. For the first time in years, Ethan heard fear in his father's voice. The next afternoon, Ethan drove back to the family home he hadn't seen since the funeral. The house looked smaller now. Older, paint peeled near the windows, and weeds crawled across the walkway. His father opened the door slowly. Time had not been kind to him. Gray hair replaced the dark confidence Ethan remembered. His shoulders sagged heavily as if carrying invisible weight. Inside, his mother looked exhausted from crying. You bought the debt? She asked quietly. Ethan nodded once. His father swallowed hard. So this is revenge. Maybe it was. But strangely, Ethan no longer felt satisfaction. He looked around the living room, where family photographs still covered the walls. Nearly every picture included Daniel. Very few included him. You thought I'd destroy you, Ethan said calmly. His father didn't answer. Ethan reached into his briefcase and placed the debt papers onto the table. I'll erase everything, he said. Both parents stared at him in shock, but first, Ethan continued, I want the truth. His mother immediately began crying again. His father's jaw tightened. What truth? The truth about Grandpa, about Daniel, about me. Silence filled the room. Then Ethan looked directly at his father. Tell me why it was so easy to throw me away. The question shattered whatever pride remained. His mother spoke first through tears, because I was weak. Ethan turned toward her quietly. I knew what your father did was wrong, she admitted. But Daniel always caused problems, and you stayed quiet. It became easier to blame you instead. Her honesty hurt more than excuses. Then Ethan faced his father. For several seconds, the older man said nothing. Finally, he whispered something Ethan never expected to hear. You reminded me of myself. Ethan frowned slightly. I hated that. His father admitted brokenly. You weren't weak, Ethan. You were sensitive, creative. I spent my whole life believing those things made a man fail. Tears filled his mother's eyes again. And when your father loved those qualities in you, he continued softly, I became jealous. The room fell silent. Years of anger suddenly felt heavier than ever before. The room remained silent long after Ethan's father finished speaking. Rain tapped softly against the windows of the old family house while nobody moved. For years, Ethan imagined hearing an apology from his parents. He thought it would heal something broken inside him. Instead, it only made him tired. His father sat hunched forward on the couch, staring at the floor with red eyes. The proud, intimidating man Ethan once feared looked smaller now, older, human. His mother quietly wiped tears from her face. We failed you, she whispered, every single time you needed us. Ethan looked at both of them and realized something painful. They were finally telling the truth because life had stripped away their pride, not because time magically made them better people. Still, hearing the truth mattered. For years, Ethan carried the belief that maybe he deserved what happened. Maybe he really was difficult to love. Maybe being different made him weak. Now he finally understood the problem had never been him. Slowly, Ethan picked up the mortgage documents from the coffee table. His parents watched nervously. Then, without saying a word, Ethan tore the papers in half. His mother gasped softly. His father looked stunned. Why would you do that after everything? Ethan dropped the torn pieces onto the table. Because if I destroy you, he answered quietly, then I become exactly like you. No one spoke after that. For the first time since entering the house, Ethan felt something inside him loosen. Not forgiveness exactly. The damage was too deep for that. But the hatred he carried for 7 years no longer controlled him. A week later, Ethan visited Grandpa Walter's grave alone. The cemetery looked peaceful beneath the afternoon sunlight. Birds moved through nearby trees, while warm wind brushed across the grass. Ethan stood silently in front of the headstone, holding Grandpa's silver watch tightly in his hand. I did it, he said softly. His voice sounded strange in the open air. They needed me after all. He laughed quietly, though there was sadness behind it. For several minutes, Ethan simply stood there remembering old memories. Grandpa teaching him how to repair watches at the kitchen table. Grandpa sneaking him extra dessert when his parents argued with him. Grandpa sitting through Ethan's awkward high school art presentations while everyone else skipped them. You were the only one who saw me, Ethan whispered. Tears filled his eyes unexpectedly. Before leaving, Ethan placed his hand gently against the cold stone. I hope I made you proud. 3 days later, Ethan received an unexpected call from an estate lawyer handling unfinished matters connected to Grandpa Walter's belongings. There's a safety deposit box listed under your name, the lawyer explained. It appears your grandfather arranged it years ago. Inside the small box, Ethan found old photographs, handwritten letters, and a leather journal filled with Grandpa's thoughts about family, life, and regret. But one envelope stood apart from everything else. It simply read, "For Ethan." With trembling hands, Ethan opened it carefully. Inside was Grandpa's final letter. "If you are reading this," the letter began, "then life probably became harder than I hoped it would for you." Ethan smiled sadly. "I spent many years watching this family confuse pride with strength. Your father feared softness because the world taught him cruelty was power. Daniel feared failure so deeply that he chased shortcuts instead of character." Ethan continued reading slowly. "But you, Ethan, you kept your kindness even when life gave you reasons not to. That is rare." Tears blurred the words. Then came the sentence that stayed with him forever. "Success is not becoming richer than the people who hurt you. Success is becoming kinder without becoming weak." Ethan closed his eyes. For years, he believed revenge would heal him. He believed proving everyone wrong would erase the pain of abandonment. But Grandpa understood the truth long ago. Winning wasn't about watching his family suffer. It was about surviving without losing himself. Months later, Ethan opened a trade school for struggling teenagers who had been abandoned, rejected, or left behind by their families. He named it Walter Ridge Academy in honor of Grandpa. On opening day, dozens of nervous students walked through the doors carrying the same uncertainty Ethan once carried. Above the entrance hung a bronze plaque with Grandpa's favorite words engraved across it: "Your beginning does not decide your worth." As Ethan watched students laugh, learn, and believe in themselves for the very first time, he finally understood something beautiful. The sweetest revenge was building a life filled with purpose, love, and peace without the people who once promised he would fail.